a hiker found a backpack hanging from a tree. It belonged to a missing teen. The air in Oregon's Mount Hood National Forest was thin and sharp, smelling of pine sap and damp earth, a scent that usually calmed the frayed edges of Mark's soul. But not today. Today, the silence of the woods felt different, not peaceful, but watchful, predatory. He'd been hiking for 3 hours. The crunch of his boots on the gravel path, a steady rhythm against the frantic thumping in his chest. It was a self-imposed penance, this grueling trek up the winding trail. A way to sweat out the toxins of a life he was trying to leave behind in the city below, the late nights, the bad deals, the woman whose name was a ghost on his lips. He paused, leaning against a towering Douglas fir to catch his breath, and that's when he saw it. Not on the trail, but a good 50 yards into the dense, untamed thicket of ferns and thorny bushes. A flash of unnatural color against the muted greens and browns. It was a backpack, a vibrant, almost offensively cheerful shade of turquoise, dangling from the thick, low-hanging branch of an old-growth cedar. It hung there like a strange, forgotten fruit. A cold dread, slick and immediate, washed over him. This was wrong. Hikers didn't just leave their gear hanging in trees, deep off the marked path. Not here, not in this part of the forest, notorious for its sudden drop-offs and disorienting fog. He scanned the area, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Hello," he called out, his voice sounding small and foolish against the vastness. The only answer was the rustle of a squirrel in the underbrush. He hesitated for only a moment. He couldn't just walk away. Pushing aside a curtain of wet ferns, the fronds slapping cold against his face, he began to make his way toward the tree. Thorns snagged at his jacket, and the ground, soft and loamy, tried to suck at his boots. The closer he got, the more the details sharpened into a horrifying picture. The backpack wasn't just hanging, it was snagged, as if it had been thrown, or ripped off in a struggle. One of the straps was torn, the white stuffing peeking out like a wound. Pinned to the front pocket by a silver butterfly keychain was a laminated student ID. His breath hitched. He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers brushing against the cold plastic. The face staring back at him was young, achingly so. A girl, with bright, hopeful eyes and a spray of freckles across her nose. Her smile was wide and a little goofy, a typical high school portrait. The name printed beneath the photo was Chloe Benson. Below that, Northwood High School. Chloe Benson. The name was a jolt of electricity, a headline ripped from the local news and shoved in his face. The missing girl, the one they'd been searching for 3 agonizing weeks. The smiling, happy teenager who had vanished after a Friday night football game, her car found abandoned at a trailhead 10 miles from here. Her phone powered off, her life seemingly erased. Mark felt the forest floor tilt beneath him. He was standing at the edge of a nightmare. This wasn't just a lost item, it was a relic, a clue, a tombstone. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers clumsy and numb. The signal was weak, flickering between 1 bar and none. He held it up, moving it around, praying, "Come on, come on." Finally, a single precious bar solidified. He dialed 911. His voice a ragged whisper when the dispatcher answered. I think I found something, he stammered, the words tasting like ash. The missing girl, Chloe Benson. I found her backpack. The dispatcher's voice, initially bored and procedural, sharpened with sudden urgency. She took his location, her questions precise and rapid, but Mark's mind was elsewhere. His gaze was fixed on the backpack, on the jaunty little butterfly keychain that seemed like such a cruel mockery. He could almost see the girl, her laughter echoing in the silent woods. Before it was violently extinguished, while he waited, an eternity stretched into 20 minutes, he did something he knew he shouldn't. He unzipped the main compartment of the backpack. He told himself it was to look for more clues, for anything that might help, but it was a morbid curiosity. A need to understand the last moments of the girl with the hopeful eyes. Inside, nestled, between a worn copy of The Great Gatsby and a half-eaten bag of trail mix, was a small, leather-bound journal. Its cover was plain, a deep burgundy, The kind of diary a teenage girl poured her secrets into. His hands shook as he opened it. The first few pages were filled with loopy, cheerful handwriting doodles of hearts and stars, notes about classes, complaints about her parents. But then the tone shifted. The handwriting grew spikier, more frantic. The entries became darker, filled with a creeping sense of fear. October 12th, he won't leave me alone. He's everywhere. At my locker, outside my house. He says he just wants to talk, but his eyes, they don't look like he wants to talk. They look hungry. Mum says I'm being dramatic. Dad says he's just a boy with a crush. They don't see him. Not the way I do. October 15th, he followed me home from school today. I saw his car in my rearview mirror the whole way. I took a different route, a long one, just to be sure, but he was still there. When I pulled into my driveway, he just parked across the street and watched me. I ran inside and locked the door. I told Dad, and he went outside to confront him, but he was gone. Dad thinks I'm imagining things. He thinks the stress of college applications is getting to me. Am I going crazy? Mark's blood ran cold. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was an obsession. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the desperate, terrified words. The name appeared, scrawled with such force, it tore the paper. Mr. Thompson. October 19th, Mr. Thompson gave me a D on my history paper. He said it was unfocused. He kept me after class to talk about it. He closed the door. He stood so close I could smell his coffee breath and something else, something sweet and cloying, like cheap cologne. He put his hand on my shoulder and said he could help me improve my grade, that we could have private tutoring sessions. His thumb brushed against my neck. I felt so sick. I just grabbed my stuff and ran out. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? He's the teacher of the year. Everyone loves him, Mr. Thompson. Mark knew that name. David Thompson. The charismatic, beloved history teacher from Northwood High. The man who had organized the volunteer search parties for Chloe. The man who had given tearful interviews to the local news, pleading for his favorite student's safe return. The hypocrisy was a physical blow. Knocking the air from Mark's lungs, he heard the distant sound of sirens. A faint wail that grew steadily louder, slicing through the oppressive silence of the forest. The cavalry was coming. But as he stood there, the girl's diary clutched in his hand. A new, more terrifying thought began to form. The backpack was here. But where was Chloe? The area was soon flooded with light and noise, a stark violation of the natural world. Sheriff's deputies in crisp brown uniforms swarmed the scene, their faces grim. They cordoned off the area with yellow tape, turning the small clearing into a sterile official crime scene. Mark was guided away, a heavy blanket draped over his shoulders. Though he wasn't cold, he was burning up with a feverish rage. He sat on the bumper of a patrol car, giving his statement to a detective with tired, patient eyes. He recounted everything. His voice hoarse the flash of turquoise, the butterfly keychain, the diary. He watched as a forensics team, dressed in white Tyvek suits, carefully lowered the backpack from the tree, handling it with a reverence usually reserved for sacred objects. Then, a new sound. The crunch of expensive shoes on gravel. A man in a tailored suit, his face a mask of practiced concern, strode into the clearing. He was flanked by two other men, their expressions hard and unreadable. Mark recognized him instantly from the news. It was Michael Benson, Chloe's father, a real estate mogul, a pillar of the community, a man whose wealth and influence were the stuff of local legend. He didn't look like a grieving father. He looked like a predator whose territory had been invaded. His eyes, cold and blue, swept over the scene, dismissing the uniformed officers with a glance. They landed on the detective questioning Mark, and he walked straight toward them, his movements radiating an aura of absolute power. "What the hell is going on here?" Michael Benson demanded, his voice a low growl that cut through the professional. "Calm. My daughter's bag is found, and I have to hear about it from a goddamn news scanner who's in charge." The detective, a man named Miller, stood up, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Benson, this is an active crime scene. I'm going to have to ask you to stay behind the tape. Benson let out a short, incredulous laugh. The tape? Don't talk to me about the tape, detective. I own half the land this forest is on. I want answers now. He pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Mark. Who is this? What did he find? Before Miller could answer, Benson's gaze fell on the burgundy journal, which an evidence technician was carefully placing into a plastic bag. His eyes widened, and for a split second, the mask of control slipped. Mark saw it a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic. What is that? Benson snapped, his voice sharp. Is that a diary? Sir, we can't discuss the details of an ongoing investigation, Miller said, his tone firming. But Benson wasn't listening. He was staring at the diary as if it were a venomous snake. He took a step forward, his hand reaching out, but one of his men placed a restraining hand on his arm. Benson shook him off, his face flushed with a sudden, violent anger. I want to see that book, he snarled. It's my daughter's. It's my property. The confrontation was a raw display of power and fear. Mark watched, his skin crawling. Why would a father be so terrified of his missing daughter's private thoughts? What secret was hidden in those pages that could make a man of Michael Benson's stature come undone in front of a dozen cops? The detective stood his ground, and the standoff hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The sounds of the forest, the birds, the wind had vanished, replaced by the tense, humming silence of a secret about to break. Mark looked from the powerful, panicked father to the small, burgundy diary, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was about more than a missing girl. He had stumbled into a story that was already written, a tragedy of secrets and lies, and the discovery of the backpack was not the beginning. It was the fuse being lit on a bomb that had been waiting to explode. The cliffhanger wasn't where Chloe was, it was what was in that diary, and why her own father looked ready to kill to keep it from being red dot. The search for Chloe Benson had been a public spectacle of grief, a performance orchestrated for the cameras. Now, in the deep dark woods, the real story was beginning to claw its way into the light. And it was uglier and more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. The turquoise backpack was a beacon, a signal flare from a girl lost in more than just the forest. She was lost in a world of powerful men and their devastating secrets, and Mark had just found the map. The immediate shock was the backpack, but the true horror was the realization that the monster she was running from wasn't a stranger in the woods. It was someone everyone knew, and he was still out there. The next few hours were a blur of procedural questions and sterile waiting rooms. Mark was taken to the sheriff's station, a squat beige building that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. He sat in a small windowless interrogation room, the silence pressing in on him. He kept seeing Chloe Benson's face, her hopeful smile, a ghostly afterimage, burned into his vision. He kept hearing the frantic scratch of her pen in the diary. A soundtrack to her terror. Detective Miller finally returned, his face etched with a weariness that went beyond a long day. He sat down opposite Mark, placing a styrofoam cup of coffee on the metal table between them. We've confirmed it, Miller said, his voice flat. The handwriting matches samples from her schoolwork. The journal belongs to Chloe Benson. He paused, his gaze unwavering. And we've read the entries you mentioned. About Mr. Thompson. Mark leaned forward. So you'll bring him in. You'll question him. Miller's expression was unreadable. We'll look into it. David Thompson is a respected member of this community, a teacher of the year. We can't just drag him in based on the diary of a troubled teenage girl. Troubled. Mark's voice rose, incredulous. She wasn't troubled, she was terrified. He was stalking her, harassing her. It's all in there. And we'll investigate, Miller repeated, his tone placating, but with an undercurrent of dismissal that made Mark's stomach clench. We have to follow procedure. We have to be careful. Careful. A girl is missing, presumed dead, and you want to be careful. Mark slammed his hand on the table, the coffee cup jumping. What about her father? You saw him out there. He was terrified of that diary. Why? Miller sighed. A long, drawn-out sound of frustration. Michael Benson is a powerful man. Mark, he's grieving, he's not thinking straight. Bullshit, Mark spat. That wasn't grief, that was fear. He knows what's in that diary. He knows something about Thompson. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious situation. Mark stood up, pacing the small room like a caged animal. You're all protecting him, aren't you, Thompson? Benson. They're all part of the same club. The rich, the powerful, they close ranks. And a girl like Chloe, she's just collateral damage. Miller's face hardened. You're done here, Mark. We have your statement. Don't leave town. Mark was escorted out of the station, the cool night air a slap in the face. He stood on the sidewalk, the streetlights casting long, distorted shadows. The world felt tilted, its moral axis skewed. He had handed them the truth, written in a dead girl's hand, and they were going to bury it. They were going to protect the monster and let the victim's memory be tarnished with whispers of her being troubled. He looked up at the night sky. The stars obscured by the town's artificial glow. The silence of the forest had been replaced by the hum of a town determined to protect its secrets. But Mark had read Chloe's words. He had felt her fear, and he couldn't let it go. The immediate shock of finding the backpack had faded, replaced by a cold, burning resolve. If the police wouldn't find the truth, he would. He had to. For the girl with the hopeful eyes and the butterfly keychain. The cliffhanger was no longer just a question of what happened to Chloe. It was a question of whether anyone had the courage to expose it. And as he stood there, alone in the dark, he realized the answer might have to be him. The shock was over. The fight was just beginning. Chloe Benson was sunshine distilled into human form. That's what everyone said. She was the girl who remembered your birth, who left encouraging notes in your locker, who could defuse a tense cafeteria argument with a well-timed joke. She was the golden girl, the one with the perfect grades, the loving parents, the bright, limitless future. But the sunshine was a performance, a carefully constructed facade to hide the shadows that were gathering at the edges of her life. Her home, a sprawling glass-walled mansion perched on a hill overlooking the town, was a monument to her father's success. It was a house designed for magazines, not for living. The white carpets were pristine, the chrome surfaces gleamed, and the silence was absolute. It was a beautiful, sterile cage. Her father, Michael Benson, was a man carved from granite and ambition. He loved Chloe, but he loved her the way he loved his company as an asset, a reflection of his own perfection. Her grades, her achievements, her popularity, they were all entries on a balance sheet of his success as a parent. He didn't see the girl, he saw the brand. Her mother, Eleanor, was a ghost in her own home. A woman who had long ago faded into the background of her husband's colossal ego. She drifted through the cavernous rooms, her smile as fragile as spun glass, her eyes holding a deep, settled sadness. She saw Chloe's fear, the subtle dimming of her light. But she was powerless to stop it. Trapped in the same gilded cage. As her daughter, the family dinners were tense, silent affairs, the clinking of silverware, the only sound. Each of them playing their part in a hollow pantomime. Of a happy family. Chloe's secret life was lived in the pages of her burgundy journal. It was there she confessed her real fears, her real dreams. It was there she wrote about the boy from the wrong side of the tracks. Liam, whose crooked smile and grease-stained hands made her feel more alive than anyone in her father's world of country clubs and cocktail parties. Their meetings were clandestine, stolen moments in the back of the town's old movie theater or long drives in his beat-up pickup truck. The windows down and the music loud. He was her escape, her one taste of a life that was real and messy, and beautifully imperfect. And it was in her journal that she wrote about the man who was turning her life into a waking nightmare. Mr. David Thompson. David Thompson was the town's darling. He was handsome, charismatic, and brilliant. A teacher who made history come alive. He was the kind of man mothers adored and fathers respected. His classroom was a stage, and he was the star performer, captivating his students with dramatic retellings of battles and revolutions. He had won the Teacher of the Year award 3 years running. He was a mentor, a role model, a pillar of the community. But behind the closed door of his classroom, after the final bell had rung, a different man emerged. The charisma curdled into something predatory, the passion into a chilling obsession. He had singled Chloe out from the beginning of the semester. At first, it was subtle extra praise for her work, a lingering gaze, a hand that rested on her shoulder for just a second too long. Chloe, ever the good girl, the people-pleaser, told herself she was imagining it. She was being sensitive. But the attention escalated. He started sending her emails, late at night, ostensibly about her coursework, but with personal asides that made her skin crawl. "You looked very pretty in that blue sweater today. I was thinking about your essay last night." He found reasons to keep her after class, his office suddenly feeling small and suffocating. The air would grow thick with the cloying scent of his cologne and the unspoken threat that hung between them. He was a master of the double meaning, his words a twisted dance of praise and insinuation. He made her feel special and terrified all at once. He was the perfect predator, hiding in plain sight, protected by his reputation and the town's adoration. Chloe was trapped. If she told anyone, who would believe her? She was a teenage girl. He was a beloved teacher. It was her word against his. Her father would be furious, not at Thompson, but at her, for creating a scandal, for tarnishing the family name. Her mother would just wring her hands and retreat further into her silence. So Chloe did the only thing she could. She wrote it. All down, every terrifying detail. A desperate catalogue of her own slow-motion abduction. The hidden witness to this unfolding horror was a boy named Ethan. He was a ghost in the hallways of Northwood High. A boy who had perfected the art of being invisible. He was painfully shy, with a stutter that made him a target for the school's crueler inhabitants. He spent his lunches in the library and his afternoons in the AV clubroom. A dark, cluttered space filled with old equipment and the hum of electronics. It was his sanctuary. Ethan had a secret of his own. He was in love with Chloe Benson. It was a pure, hopeless, from a distance kind of love. He would watch her in the hallways, mesmerized by her light. He would never dare to speak to her, but he saw everything. He saw the way her smile would falter when Mr. Thompson walked by. He saw the fear in her eyes when she was called to his desk. One afternoon, while he was supposed to be cataloging old video equipment, he overheard them. Thompson had kept Chloe after class again. The door to his classroom was slightly ajar, and Ethan, hidden in the shadows of the hallway, could hear their voices. Thompson's voice was low and coaxing, a snake, charming its prey. Chloe's was a barely audible whisper, tight with fear. "You're a special girl, Chloe," Thompson was saying. "So much potential. Ashamed to see it wasted because of a little misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Chloe said, her voice trembling but defiant. "You know what you did?" There was a pause, and then the sound of a chair scraping against the floor. "I'm trying to help you," Thompson said, his voice closer now, harder. "You're on the edge of a great future. I can make sure you get there. Or, I can make sure you don't. It's your choice." Ethan's heart was pounding so hard he was sure they would hear it. He wanted to burst in, to scream, to do something, anything. But he was frozen by a lifetime of fear. He was a ghost, a nobody. Thompson was a god in this school. What could he do? He shrank back into the shadows, his silence a heavy, suffocating cloak. The guilt of his inaction would become a poison in his veins, a secret he carried alongside his unrequited love. He had seen the monster, and he had done nothing. The final piece of the puzzle was Liam, the boy with the crooked smile. He was Chloe's anchor in a world that was spinning out of control. He was the only one who saw the real Chloe, the girl behind the perfect facade. He worked at his father's auto shop, his hands perpetually stained with grease. His future, as uncertain as Chloe's, was supposed to be secure. He was everything her father despised. Their relationship was a secret, a rebellion. With him, Chloe could breathe. She could be angry, she could be scared, she could be herself. She told him about Thompson, the words tumbling out of her in a frantic, tearful rush one night as they sat in his truck, parked at a scenic overlook. the town's lights twinkling below them like a handful of scattered diamonds. Liam's reaction was immediate and visceral. His hands clenched on the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "I'll kill him," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "I swear to God, Chloe, I'll kill him." "No," she pleaded, grabbing his arm. "You can't. It'll only make it worse. He'll ruin you. He'll ruin us. So what are we supposed to do? Just let him get away with it?" "I don't know," she whispered, her face buried in his chest. "I don't know." She didn't tell him everything. She didn't tell him how deep the rot went. She didn't tell him about her father's business dealings with the school board, the donations he made, the influence he wielded. She didn't tell him that David Thompson was more than just a teacher. He was a friend of her father's, a regular at the Benson family's exclusive parties. The web was far more tangled and venomous than Liam could ever imagine. These were the players, set on a collision course by secrets and lies. Chloe, the golden girl, screaming into the silent pages of her diary. Thompson, the beloved predator, hiding behind a mask of respectability. Ethan, the invisible witness, paralyzed by fear. Liam, the furious protector, kept in the dark about the true nature of the enemy. And Michael Benson, the powerful father, whose only concern was the preservation of his perfect world, even at the cost of his own daughter. The Friday night of the football game was the breaking point. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, the stadium lights blazing against the darkening sky. Chloe was supposed to be there, in the stands, cheering with her friends. But she never made it. After a particularly harrowing encounter with Thompson that afternoon, where he had backed her against a wall in an empty hallway and whispered a threat so vile it made her stomach turn. She had decided she couldn't take it anymore. She was going to run. She had packed her turquoise backpack, stuffing her journal inside. A desperate need to take her own voice, her own truth, with her. She had called Liam, her voice choked with panic. "Meet me," she'd said. The old trailhead. In an hour. But someone else had heard that call. Someone else knew her plan. The stage was set, not for a teenage elopement, but for a final, brutal confrontation. The characters had been introduced, their wounds exposed, their secrets festering. The forest was waiting, silent and impartial, ready to become the setting for the tragedy's inevitable climax. The story of the missing girl was not a mystery. It was an execution, and everyone had already played their part. The only question left was who would be brave enough to tell the truth. The weeks following the discovery of the backpack were a masterclass in public relations and quiet, brutal intimidation. The official narrative, spun by the sheriff's department and amplified by Michael Benson's formidable media machine, was set in stone. Chloe Benson was a troubled, unstable girl. The diary was the rambling fantasy of a teenager under pressure, lashing out at a respected teacher. David Thompson was the victim of a malicious posthumous smear campaign. Thompson played his part to perfection. He gave a press conference on the steps of the high school, his handsome face a mask of sorrow and bewilderment. He spoke of Chloe's vivid imagination, her struggles with the truth. He wiped away a single perfectly timed tear as he spoke of his dedication to his students and the unbearable pain of being so wrongfully accused by a girl he had only ever tried to help. The town wept with him. They rallied around him, creating a Facebook group in his support, sending him letters of encouragement, defending him with a ferocity that was terrifying in its blindness. For Liam, it was like living in a nightmare. Was brought in for questioning, again and again. The detectives treated him not as a grieving boyfriend, but as a prime suspect. His alibi that he was waiting at the trailhead for a girl who never showed up was flimsy. His history of a few minor juvenile offenses was dredged up and painted as a pattern of violent behavior. They twisted his love for Chloe into a possessive, jealous rage. They suggested that he had been the one to hurt her, that he had flown into a jealous fury and killed her, then concocted the story about Thompson to cover his tracks. "Where were you, Liam?" Detective Miller would ask, his voice deceptively calm, as they sat in the same windowless room where Mark had been questioned. "Really, You expect us to believe she was running away to be with you? A girl like Chloe Benson? With a grease monkey? Like you. The insults were designed to provoke him, to make him lash out, to give them the angry, violent suspect they wanted. Liam gritted his teeth, his hands clenched into fists under the table. I loved her, he would say, his voice raw. You don't know anything about us. His life was dismantled, piece by piece. His face was splashed across the local news, his name dragged through the mud. Customers at his father's auto shop dried up. Old friends crossed the street to avoid him. He was being systematically isolated, erased. The town's collective suspicion, a heavy, suffocating weight. He was the perfect scapegoat. Poor, angry, and disposable. Chloe's father, Michael Benson, was the architect of this campaign. He met with the sheriff, with the district attorney, with the editor of the local paper. Money changed hands, promises were made, and the narrative was solidified. He couldn't have his family's name tainted by a sordid scandal involving a teacher. He couldn't have the world know that his perfect daughter was being stalked. That his perfect life was a lie. It was easier, cleaner, to sacrifice the boy from the wrong side of the tracks. It was a business decision, a brutal, efficient act of damage control. The injustice was a physical force, a constant grinding pressure. Mark felt it every day. He had become an outcast, the man who had tried to smear the town's hero. He lost his freelance consulting gigs. His landlord suddenly found a reason to terminate his lease. He received anonymous, threatening phone calls in the middle of the night. Leave it alone, a distorted voice would hiss. You don't know what you're getting into. He was being pushed hard. They wanted him to disappear, to take the truth with him. But every threat, every act of intimidation, only fueled his resolve. He had read Chloe's words. He knew what Thompson was. He saw the cold, calculating cruelty. In Michael Benson's eyes, he couldn't let them win. He started his own investigation, a quiet, desperate search for anything that could corroborate the diary. He spent hours in the library, scrolling through old news articles, looking for any hint of a pattern in Thompson's past. He tried to talk to Chloe's friends, but their parents had forbidden it, their doors closing in his face. He was a man alone, fighting a war against an enemy with unlimited resources and no conscience. The true hell, however, was reserved for Ethan. The invisible boy was trapped in a prison of his own silence, the guilt eating him alive. He watched as Liam was crucified in the court of public opinion. He watched as Thompson was celebrated as a saint. He knew the truth. He had heard the threat in Thompson's voice. He was the one person who could back up the story in the diary. But fear was a powerful anesthetic. He would see Thompson in the hallways, and the teacher would give him a small, knowing smile. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smile that said, I know you were there. I know you heard. And if you say a word, I will destroy you. The threat was unspoken, but it was as real as the stutter that caught in Ethan's throat every time he tried to speak. He would practice in front of his mirror at night, trying to form the words. I heard him. He threatened her. But the sounds wouldn't come out. His own voice betrayed him. He would imagine going to the police, but the scene would play out in his mind like a horror movie. They wouldn't believe him. He was the weird kid, the stutterer. Thompson was the teacher of the year. They would laugh him out of the station. Or worse, Thompson would find out, and the vague, smiling threat would become something real and terrible. He thought about what they were doing to Liam, and he knew they would do the same to him, only worse. He had no one. The conflict escalated, day by agonizing day. The search for Chloe's body was officially called off, the sheriff announcing that she was now considered a runaway. The case was effectively closed. The town breathed a collective sigh of relief. The unpleasantness was over. The hero was vindicated. The villain was cast out. The story was neat and tidy. One evening, Liam was working late at the shop, trying to salvage his father's failing business, when two large silent men walked in. They weren't there to get their car fixed. They cornered him in the back, between a hydraulic lift and a wall of tires. You've been making a lot of noise, the first man said, his voice a low rumble. He cracked his knuckles, a sound like breaking twigs. Talking to reporters, the second man said, picking up a heavy wrench from a workbench, telling stories. Mr. Benson doesn't like that. Liam's heart hammered against his ribs, but he stood his ground. I'm not afraid of you. The first man laughed, a short, ugly sound. You should be. He shoved Liam hard against the wall, the impact knocking the wind out of him. The second man raised the wrench. This is your last warning, he said, his voice cold and flat. Keep your mouth shut about Chloe Benson, about David Thompson, about everything. Or the next time, we won't just be talking. They didn't hit him with the wrench. They didn't have to. The message was delivered. They were watching him. They could get to him whenever they wanted. The fear was the weapon. The next day, Ethan found a dead bird in his locker. Its neck was twisted at an unnatural angle, its small black eyes staring up at him. There was no note. There didn't need to be. It was a message from Thompson. This is what happens to things that sing. The cruelty was escalating, growing bolder. The antagonists were no longer content with just controlling the narrative. They were actively terrorizing anyone who dared to question it. Chloe was gone, but the violence she had suffered was rippling outwards, poisoning everyone she had touched. The victim was being erased, her memory rewritten. The witness was being silenced, his conscience a torture chamber. The protector was being broken, his love used as a weapon against him. The tension was a wire-pulled taut, humming with the promise of a snap. Something had to give. The injustice was too great, the pressure too intense. The neat, tidy story the town had told itself was about to be blown apart by a secret that had been hiding in plain sight all along. The breaking point came from the most unexpected of places, the cluttered, dusty sanctuary of the Northwood High Ab Club. Ethan, haunted by the dead bird in his locker and the image of Liam's bruised, defiant face in the newspaper, was slowly being crushed by the weight of his own silence. The guilt was a physical thing, a sickness in his gut. He couldn't eat, he couldn't sleep. He just sat in the dark room, surrounded by the ghosts of old technology. The hum of the machines, a poor substitute for a conscience. He was supposed to be wiping the memory cards from the school's video cameras, a routine task to prepare them for the upcoming school play. He slotted a card from camera 3, the one mounted in the hallway outside the history classrooms, into the computer, his fingers moving on autopilot. He was about to hit format when something made him pause. A flicker of movement on the screen. He rewound the footage, his heart starting to beat a little faster. The timestamp was from the afternoon Chloe disappeared. The hallway was empty, the harsh fluorescent lights giving it a sterile, washed-out look. Then, a door opened. Mr. Thompson's classroom. Chloe stumbled out, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. She was clutching her turquoise backpack. To her chest, like a shield, Thompson appeared in the doorway behind her. He wasn't smiling. The charming, handsome mask was gone. In its place was a face of cold, predatory rage. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. Chloe tried to pull away, but he was too strong. He spun her around, slamming her back against the lockers. The sound was a sickening thud, even on the silent video. Her head hit the metal, and she cried out, a small, desperate sound. You think you can just walk away? Thompson's voice was a low, venomous hiss, barely audible on the camera's cheap microphone, but the menace was unmistakable. You think you can tell your little stories and there won't be consequences? He leaned in close, his face just inches from hers. You have no idea what you've done. You've ruined everything. He grabbed the backpack, trying to rip it from her grasp. No, Chloe screamed, holding on with all her might. It's mine. You can't have it. The struggle was brief and brutal. Thompson was stronger. He tore the backpack from her, the strap ripping in the process. He raised his hand, and for a terrifying second, Ethan thought he was going to hit her. But instead, he just pointed a finger in her face. You're going to fix this, he snarled. You're going to tell everyone you lied. You're going to tell your father you're going to make this right. Or I swear to God, Chloe, I will burn your entire world to the ground. He shoved her away from him, and she stumbled, catching herself on the opposite wall. He turned and walked back into his classroom, the turquoise backpack in his hand. Chloe stood there for a moment, sobbing, her body shaking with a mixture of fear and defiance. Then, she straightened up, wiped her eyes, and ran down the hallway. Out of the frame, Ethan stared at the screen, his breath caught in his throat. He felt like he was going to be sick. It was all there. The assault, the threat, the proof. It wasn't just Chloe's word against his anymore. It was there, in grainy, undeniable video. He hadn't just heard it. He had seen it. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely operate the mouse. He saved the file, his mind racing. He copied it onto a small unmarked flash drive, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. This changed everything. This was the weapon they needed. But what he saw next sent a new wave of ice through his veins. He kept watching the footage. A few minutes after Chloe ran, the bell rang, and the hallway flooded with students. Then, another figure appeared at Thompson's door. Michael Benson. He walked into the classroom without knocking. The door closed. Behind him, Ethan fast-forwarded the footage. 10 minutes passed. 15, 20. The door opened again. Benson and Thompson walked out together. Benson was holding the turquoise backpack. His face was a thundercloud of fury. Thompson looked pale, shaken. They walked down the hall, directly toward the camera. Their voices were clearer now. "Handle it," Benson was saying, his voice a low, controlled growl. "I'll take care of the girl. You just keep your mouth shut. This never happened. Understand?" "But the diary," Thompson said, his voice strained. "She wrote everything down. If anyone finds it, they won't." Benson cut him off, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a sound more terrifying than any shout. "I'll make sure of it. I'll take her for a drive. We'll have a talk, up by the old logging roads. She'll listen to reason. She always does." He handed the backpack to Thompson. "Get rid of this, burn it. I don't care, just make it disappear." Thompson nodded, taking the bag. "What about the boy? The grease monkey she's been sneaking around with?" Benson's smile was a chilling, predatory / "Don't worry about him. He's the insurance policy. If this goes sideways, he takes the fall." A tragic story. The jealous boyfriend. The runaway girl. It's clean. They walked past the camera and out of sight. Ethan felt the world dissolve around him. It wasn't just Thompson, it was a conspiracy. A father, plotting to silence his own daughter to protect his reputation. A father, ready to frame an innocent boy for her murder. The plot twist wasn't just that there was a clue, it was that the monster wasn't just the teacher. The monster was the father too. The full horrifying scope of the conspiracy laid itself bare in the flickering light of the computer monitor. Chloe hadn't run away. She hadn't been the victim of a random act of violence in the woods. She had been taken by her own father. He was the last person to see her alive. He had driven her up to the logging roads, the place where her car was found, with her diary in his possession. The story he and Thompson had concocted was a lie. A carefully constructed alibi to cover up a crime, so monstrous it was almost unthinkable. The stakes had just shifted from a personal tragedy to a public scandal of epic proportions. This wasn't just about getting justice for Chloe anymore. It was about exposing the rot at the very heart of their town. The corruption of power. The terrifying lengths a wealthy man would go to in order to protect his perfect image. Ethan ejected the flash drive, its plastic casing feeling impossibly heavy in his palm. He held the truth. He held the bomb. For the first time in his life, the invisible boy had the power to make everyone see. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but for the first time, it was overshadowed by something else, a burning, righteous anger. He thought of Chloe's terrified face. He thought of Liam, alone and abandoned, taking the blame for a crime he didn't commit. He thought of the dead bird in his locker. He stood up, his legs shaky but firm. His stutter was gone, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't go to the police. They were in Benson's pocket. He couldn't go to the media. Benson controlled them too. He had to go to the one person who had been fighting for the truth from the beginning. The one person who had nothing left to lose. He had to find Mark. The tension had been cranked to its absolute maximum. The bomb was about to go off, and the fallout would be spectacular. The whole town was about to learn the truth about their hero, their benefactor, and the golden girl they had so easily discarded. The trial of Liam Connor for the murder of Chloe Benson was the biggest media event the town had ever seen. It was a circus, a public spectacle orchestrated by Michael Benson and his high-powered legal team. The courtroom was packed every day with reporters, with Thompson supporters, with morbidly curious townspeople. It was a show trial, and Liam was the star sacrifice. The prosecution, led by a district attorney who owed his career to Michael Benson, laid out their case with brutal efficiency. They painted Liam as a violent, jealous monster. They used his juvenile record, his angry text messages, his lack of a solid alibi. They twisted his secret love for Chloe into a possessive obsession that had ended in murder. David Thompson was their star witness. He took the stand, his face a mask of tragic sincerity. He spoke of Chloe's infatuation with him, of how he had to gently rebuff her advances. He recounted how Liam had threatened him, how he had seen him arguing with Chloe. He was a masterful liar, his performance so convincing that the courtroom hung on his every word. He was the hero, the victim, the moral center of the story. Liam sat at the defendant's table, his public defender looking overwhelmed and outmatched. He watched as his life was rewritten, his character assassinated. He saw the jury, their faces a mixture of pity and contempt. He was already convicted in their eyes. Hope was a distant, flickering light, about to be extinguished. Mark was in the back of the courtroom, a silent, furious observer. He had tried to give his information, the story from the diary, to Liam's lawyer. But the man had been dismissive, afraid to challenge the powerful forces arrayed against them. Mark had tried to talk to reporters, but he was brushed off as a crank, a conspiracy theorist. He was helpless, forced to watch as the gears of a corrupt justice system ground an innocent boy to dust. Then, on the final day of the prosecution's case, everything changed. Liam's lawyer was in the middle of a half-hearted cross-examination of a forensics expert when the main doors of the courtroom burst open. Everyone turned to look. Standing in the doorway, his face, pale but resolute, was Ethan. And beside him, his hand on the boy's shoulder, was Mark. The judge, a stern man with a face like a clenched fist, banged his gavel. Order. This is a courtroom, not a public thoroughfare. Who are you? Mark stepped forward, his voice ringing with a clarity and force that silenced the room. Your Honor, my name is Mark Brewer. This is Ethan Miller. We have new evidence in the murder of Chloe Benson. Evidence that will prove Liam Connor's innocence and expose the real killers. The courtroom erupted in a cacophony of gasps and whispers. The prosecutor shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. Objection. This is a theatrical stunt, a desperate attempt to derail these proceedings. Michael Benson, sitting in the front row, looked like he had seen a ghost. His face went white, his eyes locking on Ethan with a look of pure, murderous fury. Thompson, on the witness stand, began to fidget, his confident composure cracking. Evidence, the judge said. His curiosity piqued despite his annoyance. What evidence? Mark held up a small silver flash drive. Video evidence, Your Honor, from a security camera at Northwood High School. Footage from the day Chloe Benson disappeared. The prosecutor paled. Benson's lawyer was on his feet, shouting objections. But the judge, his eyes narrowed, raised a hand for silence. He looked at Liam's public defender, a man who suddenly seemed to have woken from a long sleep. Counselor, do you wish to call this witness? The lawyer, seeing a lifeline, nodded vigorously. Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Ethan Miller to the stand. What followed was the most dramatic, explosive moment in the town's history. Ethan, his voice shaking at first, but growing stronger with every word, told the court what he had seen. He told them about the AV club, about wiping the memory cards, about the footage he had found by accident. I was scared, Ethan said, his eyes finding Liam's across the courtroom. I was a coward. I saw what they were doing to you, and I did nothing. I'm so sorry. Then, they played the video. A large screen was set up in the courtroom. The grainy, silent footage flickered to life. The entire room was silent, watching the brutal confrontation between Chloe and Thompson. They saw him slam her against the lockers. They heard his threats. They saw him rip the backpack from her hands. A wave of shock rippled through the gallery. The supporters of the beloved teacher stared in disbelief, their hero turning into a monster before their very eyes. Then came the second part of the video, the part that would break the internet, the part that showed Michael Benson arriving, conferring with Thompson, taking the backpack, the part where his voice, cold and clear, laid out the entire conspiracy. I'll take care of the girl. I'll take her for a drive. Up by the old logging roads. The grease monkey. He's the insurance policy. He takes the fall. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, a thick, suffocating vacuum. Then, a single guttural sob broke the stillness. It was Eleanor Benson, Chloe's mother, her face a mask of utter devastation, as the truth of her husband's monstrous betrayal crashed down upon her. Michael Benson shot to his feet, his face contorted in a mask of primal rage. Lies. It's all lies. Doctored footage, a setup, but it was too late. The spell was broken. The truth, once seen, could not be unseen. The jury stared at him, their faces filled with horror and revulsion. The reporters were scribbling furiously, their phones already transmitting the bombshell to the world. David Thompson, on the witness stand, seemed to shrink, to collapse in on himself. His face was ashen, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. He looked at Benson, then at the prosecutor, then at the doors, as if calculating his chances of escape. The judge banged his gavel, his voice thundering through the courtroom. Order, order. The jury will be escorted from the room. The witness is to be taken into custody. Michael Benson, you are not to leave this courtroom. It was chaos. Sheriff's deputies moved in, surrounding a sputtering, protesting Benson. Two other officers approached the witness stand and placed David Thompson in handcuffs. He didn't resist. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by the hollow-eyed shock of a man whose world had just been utterly and irrevocably destroyed. The cinematic payoff was complete. It wasn't a quiet act of justice. It was a public execution. A live-streamed immolation of two powerful men, brought down by a dead girl's diary, an invisible boy's courage, and a grainy piece of video footage. Liam was surrounded by his lawyers, his face a mixture of shock, relief, and overwhelming grief. He was free, but the cost had been unimaginable. He looked across the chaos of the courtroom and met Mark's gaze. He nodded, a silent, profound acknowledgement of the man who had refused to give up on him. Mark stood with Ethan, his arm around the boy's shoulders. Ethan was crying, silent tears of relief and sorrow streaming down his face. He had faced his fear, and in doing so, he had brought down giants. The story had exploded. The courtroom bombshell was the spark, and the internet was the gasoline. The footage went viral, a testament to a father's monstrous betrayal and a town's willful blindness. The case of the missing girl was over. The trial of her killers was about to begin. The catharsis was explosive, a shocking, public cleansing of a deep and terrible wound. Justice, when it finally came, was not a gentle rain. It was a hurricane. The aftermath was not a clean slate. It was a landscape of wreckage, littered with the debris of shattered lives and broken trust. The town of Northwood would forever be defined by the scandal, its name synonymous with corruption and a monstrous secret. The Benson mansion on the hill stood empty, a monument to a fallen king, its glass walls reflecting a grey, empty sky. Michael Benson and David Thompson were convicted in a swift and merciless trial. The video was irrefutable. Their own words had condemned them. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The day of their sentencing, Eleanor Benson was in the front row of the courtroom. She did not weep, she watched, her face a pale, impassive mask, as the man who had stolen her daughter's life was led away in chains. It was not a look of triumph, but of profound, soul-deep exhaustion. She had lost everything after the trial. She sold the house, and everything in it, and disappeared, leaving behind only a single public statement. There is no forgiveness for what they did. There is only the long, slow work of remembering my daughter as she was, not as the victim of their monstrous pride. Liam was a free man, but he was not the same boy who had fallen in love with Chloe in the back of a movie theater. The joy had been burned out of him, replaced by a quiet, settled sadness. He and his father closed the auto shop and moved away, seeking a place where his name wasn't a headline, where he could be anonymous, where he could try to build a new life from the ashes of the old one. Before he left, he met Mark at a small, quiet diner on the edge of town. "I don't know how to thank you," Liam said, his voice low. "You saved my life." "I didn't do it for you," Mark said, his gaze fixed on the coffee swirling in his cup. "I did it for her." They sat in silence for a long time, two men bound by a tragedy that would forever be a part of them. There was nothing more to say. Ethan became a quiet hero. He was no longer invisible. The stutter was gone, replaced by a calm confidence. He was offered scholarships to prestigious universities, hailed as a whistleblower, a symbol of courage. But he turned them all down. He had no interest in the spotlight. He had done what he had to do, and now he just wanted to be left alone. He finished high school and went to a small state college, studying computer science, finding his peace in the quiet logic of code. He had found his voice when it mattered most, and now he was content with silence. Mark stayed. He couldn't bring himself to leave the forest that had once been his escape, had become a place of pilgrimage. A few months after the trial, a small, simple memorial was erected at the trailhead where Chloe's car had been found. It was a single, polished granite bench with a small brass plaque dot, in loving memory of Chloe Benson. Her light will never be extinguished. Mark would go there sometimes, in the early mornings, when the mist was still clinging to the trees. He would sit on the bench and look out at the vast, silent expanse of the forest. He had found her backpack, and in doing so, he had unearthed a truth so ugly it had nearly broken him. He had fought for justice, and he had won. But it was a hollow victory. It wouldn't bring her back. One cool autumn afternoon, a year after he had first seen the flash of turquoise in the trees, he was sitting on the bench when a car pulled into the empty parking lot. A woman got out. It was Eleanor Benson. She had aged a decade, her hair now streaked with gray, but her eyes held a new strength, a clarity born of immense suffering. She walked over and sat down beside him on the bench. They didn't speak for a long time. They just shared the silence, the crisp air, the view of the woods that had taken her daughter. "I found her journal," Eleanor said finally, her voice soft. "The police gave it to me after the trial. I read it. All of it." She turned to look at him, her eyes filled with a profound, heartbreaking gratitude. "She wrote about you, not by name, of course, but she wrote about a hope, that someone, someday, would find her words and believe her, that someone would fight for her. You were the answer to my daughter's last prayer." Mark felt a lump form in his throat. He could only nod. The words caught somewhere between his heart and his lips. Eleanor stood up, pulling her coat tighter around her. "Thank you," she said simply, "for hearing her." She walked back to her car and drove away, leaving Mark alone with the ghost of the girl he had never met, but whose life had irrevocably changed his own. He looked at the woods, at the endless sea of trees. The backpack was gone. The killers were in prison. The story was over. But the emotional echo would linger forever. It was in the rustle of the leaves, in the chill of the autumn air, in the haunting memory of a girl with hopeful eyes and a butterfly keychain. The cost of truth had been immense, paid for in blood and innocence. And the silence that remained was not one of peace, but of a deep and lasting sorrow. The healing was bittersweet, a quiet acknowledgement of the light that had been lost, and the haunting, eternal reminder of the darkness that lurked just beneath the surface of a perfect, small-town life.